Hello everyone. In this video, we're basically just going to be going through some examples for chapter 4, basically for the income statement itself, okay? And the first example here is going to be a multi-step income statement example, and this is going to be a pretty comprehensive example for pretty much anything you'd have to do on, any sort of quiz or exam or homework problem or whatever it might be in this class. Like, it's a pretty comprehensive example. It has the vast majority of things you're going to see. Okay, I tried to put as many things as I could think of into one problem. Doesn't have every single thing you would ever see, but it has the vast majority of things. Okay, so if you could do something like this, you should feel pretty good for the exam. Okay, now let's just go ahead and get into the problem. We can see we have just a lot of information here. Let's just go ahead and see what's going on. It's Accrual World Corp. is a calendar year company that sells accounting merchandise. For the year ended December 31 of 2018, the company has the following data concerning its income and expenses. Okay, and then basically we get this chart here, right, with all these different amounts, and we have all the items, then we have all the amounts. Okay, and basically it's just telling us, here's our sales revenue, here's our selling expenses, all the way down, right? We don't necessarily need to read through every single thing right now. We will want to be familiar with this in a minute, but that's what we're given, right? The next thing is just, additionally, It's Accrual World Corp had 1 million shares of common stock outstanding during all of 2018, okay? And the company declared a preferred stock dividend of $50,000 on July 1st of 2018, all right? And then the required is prepare a multi-step income statement for It's Accrual World Corp for the year ended December 31, 2018 in good form. So when this says in good form, it basically means, we need to have, things like the 3-part heading, okay? We need to have proper formatting. Okay, that's basically what it means, right? We need to have a 3-part heading. We need to have proper formatting. We need to make sure we're doing everything exactly the way it's supposed to be done for a multi-step income statement, okay? So now what we want to do is that we want to basically, when we're making an income statement, okay, the good thing about the income statement is that you can kind of just memorize the format, okay? In the previous video, for this chapter, for this topic, for the income statement, we went over basically a template that you can memorize, okay? And you should memorize every single line item on that template, okay? And those include things like sales revenue, cost goods sold, gross profit, SG&A expense, income from operations, every single line item all the way down. You need to be able to make from scratch a multi-step income statement for this class, okay? And that's what they're testing you on. They're testing on whether or not you can prepare this statement, okay? A lot of the numbers are usually just straight up given. A lot of the time, it's just that we have to be able to prepare the statement. Sometimes you have to solve for the numbers, sometimes they're given. It just depends, on the way that the problem is written, okay? But anyways, so our goal is basically to take all this information and make an income statement, okay? So with that said, okay, we need to keep in mind a few things, right? So we're just going to flip to the solution and we're going to go through this, okay? So basically, we have, let's see if we can get all this on one, okay? We basically have all the information on one page there, or on one screen. There's a lot of information there, but it's just better to have it side by side, okay? So first thing is 3-part heading, right? We have that up here. So we have a 3-part heading. So we have company name, name of the statement, and then for the year ended December 31 of 2018, because that's the year that we have. Okay, and then we just need to start making the statement, right? We know for an income statement, our first line is always the sales revenue line, right? Okay, so we have, it tells us right here, $5 million is our sales revenue. So we just put $5 million, okay? The next thing that we would know, making this statement, is cost of goods sold comes next. Okay, so we would write cost of goods sold here, and then we would look in our facts and we'll see, okay, cost of goods sold, $3 million. Okay, cost of goods sold goes to there, $3 million. We know that sales revenue minus gross profit, sales revenue minus cost of goods sold equals our gross profit. So that means that our gross profit's $2 million. All right, then after that, we need to be thinking, okay, the next thing on the income statement is our SG&A expense, sales general administrative, right? So this could also be, I wouldn't necessarily write SG&A on the exam, but if you see SG&A, that means sales general administrative expenses, okay? So now we need to look on our given information and we need to decide, okay, what would go into this bucket, right? Because that's part of making the income statement. Part of it is the formatting, and part of it is knowing, okay, what are these line items called? But also part of it is saying, okay, what goes into SG&A expense? What goes into this other revenues and gains, etc. Okay, and so we need to be aware of what goes into these different categories. All right, so if we look at our facts over here, we can see that we have selling expense, okay, $60,000. We know that would definitely go in there. General expense, okay, well, that seems like that would make sense to go in there. Interest revenue, that's not going to be included in SG&A. Loss from a sale of investment, nope. Interest expense, nope, that one's not going to be either. Gain on disposal division, doesn't seem like it. Income from division before disposal, and then revenue. None of those meet the definition of an SG&A expense, okay, except for these top two. So we just put selling expense at 60, general expenses at 75. We just pull those across, okay? We total those up, and we get 135, which means our income from operations is $1,865,000. That's just the $2 million of gross profit minus the $135,000 of expense, gives us $1,865,000, okay? Couple quick things to note. Again, talked about this before, but just to go over it again really quick. When we have more than one item underneath a heading such as SG&A, we want to make this separate column here. Okay, we want to have this separate column, and we want to list all of our items here in the separate column and then total them over to our sort of final column if we want to think about it that way. Okay, if we just have one item, like cost of goods sold, just one item, okay, fine, just have it on the final column over there. But if you have multiple items, it just looks better, and some professors do care about that in the exam. The other thing is, the labels, I've kind of talked about that a little bit, but the labels do matter, right? This one here, this $1,865,000, you have to have the number right, but you also have to call that income from operations. If on the exam you just wrote income or you wrote something else, right, that's not correct. It needs to say income from operations exactly that way, okay, to get credit, because the professors are basically testing whether or not you have pretty much honestly have just memorized the format of the statement and whether or not you can make it properly, okay? And so if you can't memorize the statement, or if you haven't memorized the statement, you're not going to know these, and they're not going to give you credit because that's basically what they're testing, okay? The next part is going to be, so after income from operations, this is our operating section. Everything up here, right, is our operating section, okay? And then we know directly after that is our non-operating section, right? So any other gains and revenues and then other expenses and losses go into our non-operating section. And we know that that is basically the next section, okay? So what we want to do is that we always want to make sure that we write out other revenues and gains. Assuming that there are other revenues and gains, we write out other revenues and gains, and then we list the ones underneath it, okay? And the same thing with other expenses and losses. Assuming we have some, we write other expenses and losses, and then we list them underneath. And then we indent, right? So kind of same thing up here. We indent a little bit, we indent a little bit, we indent a little bit, just to make it a little bit more clean and a little bit more presentationally. It looks like it's in good form, right, as the question's asking us to do. Okay, so now we need to determine what is an other revenue or gain, what is an other expense or loss. Okay, interest revenue, well, that's an other revenue, right? That's not from our primary operations, right? So this one's going to be other revenue. Okay, so that's going to go in this section for $15,000. Loss from the sale of an investment. Well, that's going to be an other loss, right? Because that's not related to our main operations. It's going to go in the non-operating section, okay? Then we have our, so it's right here, $7,000 loss on the sale of investment. Interest expense, you can see, is shown in the other expenses, okay? And the reason for that is because, that's sort of financing our operations, right? It's not directly related to what we're doing in the operating section specifically, right? That's kind of how we're generating, like what expenses we're incurring directly to generate income for our operations. This interest expense, yes, it's helping us to operate, but it's not considered to be an operating expense within GAAP. So we need to make sure we put that in the other expenses and losses category. The gain on the disposal of the division and the income before disposal, both of these are going to be a disc ops, discontinued operation, okay, and we're going to deal with those in just a minute. And then we have our last item of rent revenue. Generally speaking, if we see rent revenue, we're going to be considering that other revenue, and it's going to go under other revenues and gains, so it's $20,000 there. Okay, we just basically grab that and bring it over. And so, people might ask, how do you determine what's other revenues and gains, what's other expenses and losses? some of it is, somewhat common sense of, okay, if this company is in the business of selling merchandise, well, if they have rent revenue, that's not really what they're doing as their main operations, right? Or interest revenue, that's not really their main operations, right? Some of it's intuitive in that sense, and then other things you almost have to just memorize, okay? And so what you want to just have, you just want to have an idea, basically going through the problems that you're provided in the book, and then if there's any other additional ones that are provided by StudyEdge, then basically you can do those and you'll get an idea of what goes in these buckets and you'll kind of just figure it out over time. Okay, but if you're really not sure, just think about it logically, okay? And just think about, okay, does this make sense to go in operating or non-operating more? Okay? And so what we want to do is after we've gotten all of our numbers and we've gotten these classified, we just total these up. So we have 35,000 of other revenues and gains. We have 22,000 of other expenses and losses. And then we'll do income from operations plus 35 minus 22 gives us 1,878,000 for income from continuing operations before income tax. Okay, basically this label, again, it essentially needs to say that exact thing. The only other thing sometimes that's okay is you maybe could say like income, before income tax. Sometimes that's acceptable, but it really should say this just to be safe. On an exam, I would always write this out just to be safe, okay? Then we have our next section is our income tax section. We are told in the problem that our tax rate is 40%. So we literally just take income from continuing operations before income tax, multiply by 40%, we get this one right here, 751,200. Subtract that away from the 1,878,000, we get to income from continuing operations. Again, the label is very important, 1,126,800. And then we have our last section of the actual income statement before EPS, okay? Then we have discontinued operations. Again, we're indenting and we have our own little column, okay? Here, again, discontinued operation is shown net of tax. Okay, you're not going to actually write net of tax like right there on your income statement. I'm just reminding you guys that that's the way it works. Okay, so here, what we need to do is that these two amounts, the 90 and the 65, they're not net of tax. Okay, they're not net of tax. These are actually the full amounts that are given. Okay, so we actually have to figure out what the taxes are associated with those, and then we have to list those amounts net of tax. Okay, so the first thing that you're generally going to want to list is if you have income or a loss from the operations of the division, less taxes, you want to list that first. Okay, so in this case, it's $65,000. It's the second one listed here. So we start off at 65. Okay, and then if we just multiply that by 0.4, we'll see that 65,000 times 0.4 is 26,000. That's our taxes. Okay, and then we'll end up with 39,000. If we do 65 minus 26. Okay, 65 minus 26, we get $30,000 is the amount after tax, okay? Then we have the gain on disposal division, it's 90,000. If we do 90,000 times 0.4, we end up here at 36. Subtract basically 90 minus 36 is 54, and we have our second discontinued operation, okay? Like I said in the other video, you can also list on the actual exam, you could have two line items. The first one could just be saying income from operations of division, and you would have like 65, and then you would say another line item, say, income tax associated with discontinued operations, something like that, something that makes sense, and then you would just subtract away 26, and then total it over to have 39. Okay, so you could also do that. It's just that you need to make sure that whichever way you do it, you probably want to do it the same throughout. If you have two discontinued operations, you want to do it the same way for both, okay? But both ways are correct, all right? You can list it as one line item, the total 39, or you can list it as two separate line items. One is the gross amount of 65. The second one is actually the tax line, okay, of 26. Okay, you would take the 26 away from here, and you would put it like, you wouldn't list it there anymore. You would just have it like listed right around here, okay, with the 65, and then total it over for 39,000. Okay, then once you do the math there, you get 93,000. 39 plus 54 is 93,000. Add that to the income from continuing operations, we get net income of $1,219,800. Okay, we're almost done. The very last thing is our EPS. Okay, EPS must be shown here on the bottom. Okay, we have to do this if it says prepare a multi-step income statement. So whenever we're doing EPS, we need to remember that we're always starting at this line item that says income from continuing operations. Okay, and so we would go up to income from continuing operations, and we would basically just divide the we divide the income from continuing operations by the number of shares outstanding. Okay, so okay, wait 1 second. We forgot one thing. We forgot one thing there. We have to actually subtract out preferred dividends. Okay, so let's slow down and let's write this out. Our formula is like our net income, right? This is our generic formula: net income minus preferred dividends over the weighted average shares outstanding. I call that WASO, weighted average shares outstanding. Okay, so for the first one, income from continuing operations, what we want to do is we want to take our income from continuing operations, 1,126,800, subtract away 50,000, and then divide that by $1 million. Sorry, not $1 million, 1 million shares outstanding. Okay, so if we do that math and we round it to 2 decimal places, we end up with $1.08. Okay, it's basically 1.768, but we round it to 2 decimal places, and we have 1.08. Okay, then we have to do these 2 separate line items for disc ops, and then we do net income separately. Okay, so in the exam, if we have income from continuing operations, discontinued operations, and then we'll have our net income, assuming we have all those items, we need to start with income from continuing operations, then do disc ops separately. Each one needs to have its own separate line item. Okay, so there's 2 there. We need to have 2 there. Okay, then net income is the last one. Okay, so again, start at income from continuing operations and work down. Okay, next is income from operations of division, net of tax. Okay, so in this one, what we want to do is that we do it a little bit differently for these other items. Okay, that are basically the disc ops ones. We don't actually subtract out the preferred dividend. Okay, all we want to do there is that we just want to take the amount given to us right here that we solve for. Well, it wasn't given to us, but we solve for it. And we divide it by the number of shares outstanding. And that gives us 4 cents. Okay, that's how we get the 4 cents right there. We're going to go over why we don't subtract the dividends very quickly in just a second, but just bear with me for 1 minute here. Okay, and then the very last piece is to take 54,000 divided by 1 million shares outstanding. And again, that gives you the 5 cents that you see right here. Okay, so then if you were to just add those up, you would end up with net income of $1.17. Okay, so the reason that so the other thing let's do is let's solve for net income directly, right? Let's actually use the formula for EPS and solve for net income to make sure that we got the right answer. Okay, because we can do it as a function of these 3 numbers, but we can also just solve for it directly, right? Because we can just use the formula. We can say, okay, net income minus preferred dividends divided by the weighted average shares outstanding. Do we get the same number? And yes, we do. Okay, we get $1.17. So we basically kind of know we've done it correctly if we basically do it this way, where we add them all up, and then we just separately solve for this number. We have solved the problem 2 separate ways, right? One is literally just a direct solving. The other one is a function of these 3 numbers, is $1.17. Okay, the reason that we do not subtract preferred dividends from here, and sorry, if the preferred dividends is given right here, if that was not clear, it's right here. It was in the problem, and the shares were given right there as well. Sorry if I glossed over that, but that's where those come from. Okay, but the reason we do not subtract the dividends here is because it's a little complex of a reasoning. Well, it's a little complex to understand at first, but the reasoning is relatively straightforward. So when we do net income here, right, we subtract out these dividends only one time, right? We subtract out preferred dividends here once when we're actually solving for net income directly, right? And then everything above this line here is basically the other side of the equation, right? So it's basically income from continuing operations plus or minus this equals net income, right? And so when we're talking about algebra, right, if we're subtracting, so we have 2 sides of an equation. Net income is one side. If we subtract away 50,000 from the net income side one time, then that means on this other side of the equation, we can only subtract away the dividends one time, okay? And so what we do is that we subtract away the dividends from this number, from income from continuing operations, right? We did it right there. We subtracted away the $50,000, okay? The reason we can't subtract it again from these ones here is because then we'll end up double counting it, right? Algebraically speaking, if we do something to one side of the equation once, we can only do it to the other side of the equation once as well. Okay, and so that's why we do not subtract dividends from these line items here, we just do it from income for continuing operations, and then we also do it from net income because that's on the other side of the equation, okay? Right, because then if we just said minus 50,000, ignoring everything else, minus 50,000 equals minus 50,000, right? Because if we're subtracting 50,000 from here, we're allowed to subtract 50,000 once from net income, ignoring everything else, right? And mathematically that works out. If we were to subtract 50,000 here and 50,000 here, well then on this side of the equation, we'd have well more than negative 50,000, right? And so then it would not actually be equal any longer, okay? So that's the first problem, and we're gonna have one more video with another problem.